What's up guys? So today I want to talk to you guys about my experience using the Canon C500 MKII and why we upgraded from the C200. I've been using this camera now for about a year, 10 months to be exact, and we've used this for short films, commercial projects, and even for our YouTube production. The reason I bought the C500 MKII is because of how much I enjoyed filming with the C200. The C200 for me was almost the perfect cinema camera, but I feel the C500 MKII picks up where the C200 left off and it just takes it to a whole different level. The biggest differences between both of these cameras is the 6K full frame sensor that you will find on the Canon C500 MKII. To me, having full frame on a cinema camera just means that it opens up a whole new world of lens choices that you normally would not be able to have on a camera with a smaller sensor size. And let me explain what I mean by that. So some of my favorite lenses are 50mm in focal range. So for example, here in my studio, if I'm doing a talking head on the C200, if I put a 50mm lens on it, it's equivalent to about 75mm. On my C500 MKII, it's true 50mm because it has a full frame sensor, which means it is a wider field of view. And to demonstrate this more visually for you guys, let's take a very popular camera like the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K, which is a super 35mm sensor. If I put a 35mm lens, this is what it looks like. Now, if I change that to the C500 MKII, keeping the same distance with the exact same lens, look at the massive difference it makes. So because of the full frame sensor on the C500 MKII, it just gives me more lens options whenever I'm filming a scene. Another benefit of this camera is the 6K resolution. Filming in 6K means that we have the ability to reframe, especially when our output is 4K. Now, speaking of 4K, we film most of the time in 4K, and because we do that, we're still benefiting from that 6K sensor because it's downsampling that image into 4K, which means it's going to be sharper and less noisier compared to cameras like the C200 and also the new C300 Mark III. Also, this camera is somewhat future-proof, especially because 6K isn't quite the norm yet, but a lot of monitors and television are touting for that higher resolution, which was actually a big deciding factor when looking to buy this camera. However, the biggest thing about this camera is the image quality. To me, this is one of those cameras that what you see on your monitor is exactly what you're going to get. What I mean by that is I film with a lot of different cameras, and oftentimes if I see something on my monitor from a different camera and it looks great, when I bring that footage to my NLE, it doesn't look like the way I remember it. Even after spending hours on color grading, there's just something wrong. That is not the case with the C500 MKII. In fact, this reminds me a lot of the Arri Alexa. The Arri Alexa is an awesome camera because when you're filming with that camera on set and you apply a Rec. 709 LUT and you bring that footage to your NLE, it looks exactly like how you saw it on set. Take for example this clip. This is Canon Log 2. If I simply apply the free Canon provided LUT, look how amazing this looks. This is exactly how I remember it looked like on set. Here's another example. If I simply take that LUT that converts it from a log image to a Rec. 709, look how beautiful this is. And this is without me doing any tweaks or any color edits. Simply put, if I was in a pinch and I needed to deliver this really quickly, I can just add this LUT to my footage and I would be okay with it because the image right out of the box looks fantastic. One of the things that really bothered me with the C200 was that you couldn't record 4K 10-bit internally, let alone externally, which I felt was very strange. I don't know what Canon was thinking. And that really forced us into a raw workflow because we didn't want to be limited by the 8-bit color space. Now on the C500 MKII, we get this outstanding 10-bit XF AVC codec that runs great on just about any computer and it color grades very nicely. In fact, most of the content that we film is actually recorded in 10-bit because we're able to push the colors around while still retaining quality. And like the C200, the 12-bit RAW is great. The C500 though does edge out the C200 in low light and also dynamic range because of that full frame sensor. Now, funny enough, the other day we were hanging out with a couple of filmmakers and we were testing out these beautiful master built PL lenses at night. And the whole entire time my buddy Matt was flipping out because he's using a Red Komodo as a B cam and he was telling me, Armando, I can't go above 1600 ISO, otherwise we're gonna get a lot of noise. And that's usually the case with cinema cameras. If you've ever filmed with like an Arri Alexa Mini, you'll notice that the sweet spot is 800 ISO. And even then, you'll still get a bit noise, but anything above that, you'll definitely need to use denoising software. Meanwhile, on the C500 Mark II, we set the camera to 3200 ISO pretty much the whole entire time, and the image still looked phenomenal. Another time I remember pushing the C500 was on a short film where I was camera operating, and I remember I was at 6400 ISO, which at the time when I was looking on the monitor, I told myself, wow, that looks clean. And then when I brought that footage into my NLE, I noticed that that footage was actually very clean and I didn't need to add any denoising. So in my experience using this camera, I can tell you guys, for a cinema camera, it is great for low light. Now let's go ahead and switch gears and talk about the modularity of this camera, which I think excels in comparison to the Canon C200. Now, for example, on my C200, I bought it with the viewfinder. If I wanted to fly it on a gimbal, I would actually have to send my camera to Canon for them to remove that, which can be a pain. Now on the C500 Mark II, I can actually do it myself. It's literally just a bunch of screws. Now, same thing goes for the mount. We've used the PL mount on a couple of projects, and I can do this myself in a matter of minutes. And that's the beauty of this camera. If I'm filming a documentary or even a YouTube video, I can strip this camera down to the bare minimum. I can use the included battery that Canon provides. This camera also has a lot of amazing built-in features. Like for example, you get dual XLR inputs that have amazing preamps. You also get dual card slots, which means that you can actually record two 12-bit RAW files at the same time. And you can even record proxies via an SD card. And this camera also has built-in ND filters, which we actually use all the time. And that's something that I really enjoy about this camera, is just how easy it is to use. The configuration and layout, everything is literally a push button away. And if you don't like the presets that Canon has provided, you can remap all of these buttons to fit your workflow. And that's the thing, even like small little details like these buttons light up at night, and it just shows the attention to detail that the engineers put into this camera. The ergonomics of this camera are amongst the best, if not the best, of any cinema camera available today. And I know that's a pretty bold statement, and I say this because it doesn't matter how we use this camera. Whether we rig it to a car, we use it on a gimbal, or we're just hand holding this camera, it's just a joy to use. Something else we've enjoyed with this camera is having electronic image stabilization, also known as EIS. And what this means is that we can get more creative with our movement without having to worry about shaky footage or having to warp stabilize in post. In fact, here's a clip of me tracking a Ferrari going about 60 miles an hour, and I was using EIS. I had no hardware stabilization, meaning no gimbal. This was just all onboard stabilization, and the footage looks great. Now, just to give you an example of how fast I was, here it is in real time with our BTS cam. This exact same shot would have been impossible to do with any other cinema camera that didn't have proper software or hardware stabilization or a focus puller on set. One thing about Canon's autofocus is just how smooth the rack focus is. It just feels very organic. Even at the highest speed setting, it just eases in very smoothly, something that you don't get with DSLR or even mirrorless cameras. And this was no different with the C200. Canon's dual pixel autofocus, in particular the cinema line, in a real world environment is predictable, reliable, and it really hasn't let us down. In particular, the face only tracking. And the way it works is, for example, if I were to get up or move my face, it would lock the focus to the last place that it saw or recognized my face. And this is actually really good because a lot of times, let's say I turn around or you have your subject, maybe they're crying and they're doing something like this, it's still going to remember that position. Or even if I were to walk up and leave, the focus would remain right here, where on other cameras, you would back focus or it would hunt somewhere else, and that's not good. And I actually wish they would implement this to their other DSLR and mirrorless cameras. Now, this camera's been awesome for us, and it checks all the marks of what we've been looking for on a cinema camera. Now, I can sit here and rave all day long about it. This video is pretty long, but instead what I want to do is talk about the things that we didn't like. They're very minor, not deal breakers by any means, and also provide feedback for Canon for future cinema cameras. The first is the audio placement. I'm talking about where you manage your audio, the levels. I feel this is a very awkward spot. Both Connor and I are always talking about, why did they put it here? It just doesn't make sense. On the C200, it was on the back, which was awesome. And I understand why they didn't put it on the back. It's because of the modularity. I wish, and if you look at it, like the size of this little square fits perfectly on this side where the CF Express cards. If they would have just flip-flop this. In other words, we have our audio controls, which makes sense because all of our other buttons are here. And then if you put the CF Express card here, which you normally are not gonna use it as much, I think that would have been a much better decision. Now, the second thing on my nitpick list is you get this really cool 4.3-inch touch LCD display, which is great for touch to focus. However, when you're browsing through the menu, you can't use the touch functionality. I don't understand why. And this is one that actually annoys me more, is when I'm browsing through my media, if I'm playing back footage, I have to use the joystick, which is annoying because on cameras like the R5, I can use the touch functionality to scrub through my media, which is something that I would actually like here. And this is something that they can fix on a firmware update. So Canon, if you're watching this, please make it happen. So third on my list is not being able to record 6K 10-bit, which I find kind of odd. It's not a processing power issue because you're able to record 2 streams of raw 12-bit at the same time. So why can't I record 6K 10-bit? Doesn't make sense. As I mentioned earlier, we record a lot in 10-bit. So having that extra flexibility in post with 6K is something that I would love and not have to be forced into a raw workflow. So fourth on the list is not being able to record 4K 120. I find this odd because the C500 MKII is able to do that. And again, it's not a processing thing because even if they implemented 4K 120 in a Super 35 mode, I'd be okay with that. And they say, rumors have it that they are going to implement that in a firmware update, which I hope they do. So that's my small complaint list that I have. I mean, none of these are deal breakers by any means, and there's a lot of great options, especially at this given price point. I mean, you have the FX9, the C500 Mark II. There's a many cinema cameras that you can choose from, but for me, having full frame, 6K internal RAW in this form factor package, I've yet to see another camera that even comes close. Like even the FX9, which is a great camera, doesn't record in 6K. There's no future proofing like I mentioned earlier. You can't do internal RAW. You have to outfit it with this module, which now becomes heavier and bulkier. So these are like the little nuances that other cameras have. With this one, you literally buy this camera and it's ready to shoot right out of the box. Anyways, if you've made it this far, I hope you got some value out of this video. And if you liked it, give it a thumbs up. And if you guys have any questions regarding the C500 Mark II, leave me a comment down below. My name is Armando. Thanks again for watching, and you will catch me in the next one. Adios.